Right, Digital Foundry know their stuff. Now, this is the kind of opinion I'm interested in. Not really bothered about what people think who have never touched a PS Pro 5 before. I bought one anyway. I like what it's going to do. Outside the box, already what it's doing is enough for what I want one for, but I want to hear what they have to say. I want to hear if it's good or bad. We're going to look at stuff like F1 24, compare it to the PS5, Gran Turismo 7, compare it to the PS5 as well, and other games like Horizon as well. So let's take a look and see what they say.
Hello there and welcome to a brand new DF Direct special. Well, I'm not quite sure it's DF Direct as such, but it's certainly special as Digital Foundry has had the chance for the first time to go hands-on with PlayStation 5 Pro. Well, I say Digital Foundry. What I actually mean is Oliver Mackenzie, who is joining me right here to discuss it all.
Hey, Rich. Yeah, I had a lot of fun taking a first look at the PlayStation 5 Pro in person.
Great. Well, the first game that you've highlighted is, and it's a curious one, an unexpected one, I'd say, F1 24. Now, we know from the PC version that Codemasters are really pushing features on that. There's a lot going on in that PC build. And therefore,
I mean, there initially, you can already see when comparing a Windows 11 4K max settings, ray tracing on compared to the PS5 version, is hugely better on the Windows version, on the PC. Obviously, it's going to take a certain power of PC to do that, but the point is, it still leaps and bounds beyond the base PS5. So if the Pro can come even close to the Windows 11 version with those 4K max settings ray tracing on, then it's happy days, surely. But let's see, I don't know how this is going to go.
I guess there's a lot of rendering technology they could tap into for PlayStation 5 Pro. But I'm looking at your notes here, and I'm actually pleasantly surprised at just how much they're doing here.
Yeah. I thought it was a really, really impressive racing game demo because they're doing a 4K 60 quality mode here, 4K output, and they're including 3 ray traced effects. So they're including DDGI, or Dynamic Diffuse Global Illumination, which is also included in the PlayStation 5 as well, plus RTAO, plus RT Transparency, and RT Opaque Reflections. And we do have some footage here that I was able to match part of at least. Cool. But in the few shots that I was able to match, the RTAO and the RT reflections can make a pretty insane visual difference, like a really stunning visual difference relative to the PS5 version with just DDGI. In the right circumstances, I think it's almost a generation.
Look how good that Ferrari looked before it even moved. And the way this glass looks is... This looks great on the Pro. Really good. I'm intrigued to see what they're going to say. Wow, that Ferrari looks amazing.
Visual difference relative to the PS5 version with just DDGI. In the right circumstances, I think it's almost a generational leap. Like the quality of the RTAO makes such a big difference in indirectly...
I'm just going to pause it again there for a second. A generational leap. So a lot of the speculation out there, a lot of the people that obviously haven't actually laid a finger on one of these yet, who are saying, it's not much of a difference. It's the same as a PS5, but missing the drive and all. Quite a lot of nonsense, to be honest, because everyone that hasn't actually played one yet is basically guessing. Let's be honest about that. That's pretty obvious. If you haven't seen it in action, if you haven't got one, you're looking at numbers, not knowing what this ray tracing chip does, not knowing what the PSR does, how effective it is, not knowing what the whole AI upgrading thing does and how that works. People are just guessing. This is a proper hands-on experience, and one of the first things he said is generational leap.
Areas of the track, like on the start of Monaco here, I've got the kind of indirectly lit visual difference relative to the PS5 version with just DDGI. In the right circumstances, I think it's almost a generational leap. Like the quality of the RTAO makes such a big difference in indirectly lit areas of the track, like on the start of Monaco here. I've got the kind of indirectly lit area at the start of Monaco in that afternoon sun, and you're really seeing like a ton of additional lighting detail with that RTAO that you're not seeing on the base console there.
All this extra reflections, all these lights. There's a massive amount of extra detail and effects going on. Look at this. It's all like in shadow and out of shadow. Nothing going on there. And that's in the quality mode as well. It's not in the performance mode. The cool thing about the PS5 Pro is you get the best of both worlds. It will still be doing the equivalent of what the PS5 done in performance mode, so you get a nice smoothness, but you're getting all this extra graphical ability at the same time. Wow. This is actually way more impressive than I thought it was going to be. I've got to be honest straight away.
Such a big difference in indirectly lit areas of the track, like on the start of Monaco here. I've got the kind of indirectly lit area at the start of Monaco in that afternoon sun, and you're really seeing like a ton of additional lighting detail with that RTAO that you're not seeing on the base console there. And the RT reflections apply not just to the cars, not just to trackside detail, but also all the transparent surfaces on trackside detail. So it actually looks really good. It's giving you a lot of interesting transparent reflections, like on the siding in Silverstone here. You're getting a ton of reflective detail there. It makes the game look so much better. I mean, this is not too new because we've seen this stuff on PC before, but it looks really, really good. And it's like a...
Oh, look at that. As you just said, it's not mega new because we've seen it on PC before. But this is so leaps and bounds beyond the PS5. It is unreal. I'm not knocking the PS5 because it still looks great for the, what it does for the money. But to me, there can be, and this you're looking at it with biased eyes, or you're just not looking at it at all, or you're just ignoring basic facts, then nobody can say that there's not a huge difference between the PS5 in quality mode. It's in quality mode. It's not even in performance mode. It's in quality mode compared to that PS5 Pro. Wow, I'm so glad I got one.
I mean, this is not too new because we've seen this stuff on PC before, but it looks really, really good. And as like a Formula One fan myself, it gives you a much closer fidelity to that real life experience. And I was actually able to speak to Simon Lum, who's a producer at Codemasters, who I think put it very well here.
When something is ray traced, the light simulation, it gives your eyes what they're expecting. Previous techniques have, using baking, rasterization, have attempted to give us a simulation of light. Now with ray tracing, we can actually use the traced rays to give a proper reflection, to give proper ambient occlusion. It just sits the scene in more realism. It looks more like the broadcast.
Real life.
It feels right. It's just a wow moment to kind of see that happen. It's really exciting for us. It brings people closer to the race experience we want them to have, that kind of a thrilling authenticity of being a Formula One race driver, and that's very exciting for us.
So yeah, for the RT mode, you basically get everything from the PC version, but the RT shadows. There's also improved anisotropic filtering, which I was able to notice in the footage as well. Obviously, that's a frequent pain point on consoles, sort of a little bit of a pedestrian visual feature, but it is visibly much better on PS5 Pro. In terms of that RT mode, the only real compromise I'd say is that the image isn't quite as stable as on PS5 in its quality mode, which I think is a combination of PSSR plus all those extra ray tracing effects and all the noise inherent to like RTAO. It looks fine enough, but it does a more credible job of hitting a kind of plausible looking stable 4K image in that PS5 mode, but I think the trade-off here is absolutely worth it. And then if you're interested, there's also an 8K mode and a 4K 120 mode.
I'm always interested,
8K.
More from an academic perspective, because, let's put it this way. I was one of the few to have an 8K screen, and even I lost interest and went back to a 4K display. So,
just to go over that ever so briefly, there's very little point in 8K unless you're playing on something like a 200-inch screen and from not very far away. And the reason is the human eye can only resolve so much. I'll try and use an analogy to make it really clear. Like, I'm 6 foot tall. If I stood on the beach and looked at the sand, even if you had amazing vision, you're not going to be able to see those individual grains of sand, even though that detail is technically there. That's because the human eye can only resolve so much detail given a certain distance. If I was to crouch down on the floor and look at that sand from a few inches away, I can now see every grain of sand. I can see the sparkles, the details on every single one. If I stand up again, only 6 foot away from eye to floor, I lose all that detail because the human eye cannot resolve it. And it's exactly the same with 8K. And that's what I think Richard is basically saying there is like, there's no point to 8K. I know these numbers will move on and some people will swear they can see a difference because they believe they can, because that's the way the human mind works with the placebo effect and things like that. But it's just not there. You can't resolve it unless you're literally playing your massive screen from probably 2 feet away or something, which is not going to be a feasible, practical or enjoyable experience if you're actually playing the thing. Pixel peeping, yes, you'll be able to see it. But as soon as you get like a decent distance away, the normal distance to play, the human eye cannot resolve the detail. And that is just as simple as that. Not unless you get to literally gigantic, gigantic size screens. Like, I'm not even going to try and give a number, but it basically just doesn't really work.
I'm very interested to see what you actually get with the 8K mode and how we're actually achieving 8K mode, because there is a school of thought that says that, it's not 8K unless you're rendering at actual 8K.
Yeah, I think with the PS5 Pro, you pretty much have to disabuse yourself of that notion, unless you're looking at a game like maybe The Tourist, possibly, if that ends up being an 8K output on PS5 Pro. We don't know at the moment. But there is an 8K mode that you lose the additional ray tracing in. I believe you still get DDGI in that mode.
8K, the human eye basically can't resolve unless you're watching on something like a 150-inch screen, probably too close as well, or 4K, which is going to look just as good with the ray tracing on. I know what I'd rather do.
And it's being reconstructed from, they talked about 4K to 8K, but interestingly not using PSSR, using the engine's native TAAU, Ego Engine's native TAAU. It did look very crisp at 8K. It looked very nice. And one nice thing is in the replays in this game, and indeed in the 8K mode, they drop it to 30 FPS, but you get all the ray tracing features from PC, including RT shadows, which you don't get in the 4K quality mode on PS5 Pro. So that's quite nice. But I think we have another racing game to talk about, possibly, if you'd like to have a chat about that.
Yeah, sure. Gran Turismo 7, Polyphony Digital, their technological credentials are essentially legendary. They really like to push the envelope. They love to get their hands on new hardware. And curious to know what they've done with Gran Turismo 7. We knew the highlights, right? We knew that there would be RT, quote unquote, on track. We knew there would be an 8K mode, but we'd never actually saw it or saw any media for it.
The thing with GT7 is it looks utterly fantastic anyway on the PS5, and upon first glance at both, I'm not seeing a huge amount of difference there. Maybe it's not the right track, or I'm not looking at the right thing, but to me, the point is, with the Pro, I'm getting one anyway. I'm happy with what it's going to give me for what it does. But for some of these graphical increases to be worth it, you don't want to have to pixel peep. You don't have to look for them. That should be blatantly obvious if it's fully worth the upgrade. Now, I know that some of the upgrades on this are based on smoothness. 60 frames a second instead of 30 frames a second, things like that. And I think some of the games, it is based on kind of looking as good as the PS5 fidelity mode or graphics mode, but being as smooth as the performance mode of PS5 at the same time, which is what the Pro to me is all about. And that's what I like about it. That's for me is the thing that basically sold it to me, because I really don't like games in 30 frames a second. It seems jerky and juddery to me. So for me, that is a bit of a game changer and something I'm really looking forward to. But if you're not the sort of person that cares about 30 frames a second, you don't really notice it, you're not intolerant of it in the way that someone like I am, then you may be perfectly happy with the PS5.
We knew that there would be RT, quote unquote, on track. We knew there would be an 8K mode, but we'd never actually saw it or saw any media for it. But you have now been, I guess, both eyes on and hands on.
That's correct, yeah. So GT7 was pretty impressive. They basically have two modes here, two new modes for PlayStation 5 Pro. A ray tracing mode and an image quality priority mode. And that ray tracing mode, I think, is probably a little bit more interesting. And it's what's been featured in the footage that we do have here and the footage that we've seen so far. So helpfully, they've provided the exact same replay on PS5 Pro in the RT mode and the base PS5 for me to show you here. So like when you look at the differences, the real-time cube maps do look pretty decent on base PS5, but the reflections aren't perspective correct and they're sort of warped around the car body.
Oh, I see.
And the cars don't have self-reflections of the bodywork, and the mirrors don't have accurate reflections of the environment. And like little small reflective elements that are like circular don't really get the cube map treatment, obviously, because that would not look.
The thing is, that's all well and good. Like he's saying about the mirrors, the rear view, the wing mirrors, giving accurate reflections and things like that when you're playing in the outside car view. But are you really going to notice that when you're playing the game at full speed? I think not. It's a nice thing to have, but Maybe the other stuff just kind of gets implemented at the same time, and it kind of works when it's all happening at the same time. But you're not going to notice or care about like, oh, look at that. That was an accurate rear view that I got. But sure, you don't get that on a PS5. But yeah, it's another thing completely.
Work, and the mirrors don't have accurate reflections of the environment, and like little small reflective elements that are like circular don't really get the cube map treatment, obviously, because that would not look very good. So in the RT view you're getting that, and of course quickly cars reflect other cars, which is that kind of signature of RT reflections that we often bemoan the lack of in some other titles. When you're going really, really fast, maybe it's not super noticeable, but when the cube maps are not showing, for instance, the reflection of a car in another car, you are noticing that. And here, that's just totally absent. But there are some more significant levels. When you're going really, really fast, maybe it's not super noticeable, but when the cube maps are not showing.
Yeah, I see what it means now. Now, when you're playing it, and particularly when you're in a field of a bunch of other cars, I mean, look how this Pagani is reflecting on the car there. That green, and it looks realistic. That combined with all the other effects going on at the same time, that could actually be really nice. It's all about just pushing the things a little bit further, just adding a little bit more to that ultimate realism.
For instance, the reflection of a car in another car, you are noticing that, and here that's just totally absent. But there are some more significant limitations here than I'd say in F1. Like the buildings off track don't appear to get the RT reflections treatment. Track elements that aren't the cars don't appear to get RT reflections. So like glossy surfaces appear to mostly be using screen space reflections and cube maps and things like this as opposed to RT reflections. And image quality also takes a bit of a hit. They are using PSSR here. If we do a side-by-side, I think you can see the native 4K view on base PS5 is a more substantially stable image than PS5 Pro. Which is typically doing about 1440p during gameplay and 1152p-ish during replays. Those are numbers that came up quite a bit with PSSR 2 4K. But it's tougher content for PSSR to work with, I think, because of those RT reflections, because it's high contrast, because the gameplay is so fast-paced. And the base console does not have the cleanest 4K image either, so it's sort of like one of those things where it's like, yeah, I think at a normal viewing distance it probably holds up pretty all right here. But pixel peeping it does.
Yeah, that's the key, normal viewing distance. We're looking at it right now, trying to find either an advantage for the Pro or a disadvantage for the Pro based on what we're looking at from the PS5. But it's all slowed down and we're looking at it through a magnifying glass, trying to see those differences. But that's not how you're going to play it when you actually play the game. You're going to be playing this game at full speed, racing along really fast. You get the point. This is not real-time viewing, and some of those things are not really going to make much of a difference, and some of them will. But it all depends upon what you want at the same time. And this is only one game as well, remember. Still going back to that F124, I can't stop thinking about that right now. That looked just amazing.
A bit with PSSR 2 4K, but it's tougher content for PSSR to work with, I think, because of those RT reflections, because it's high contrast, because the gameplay is so fast-paced. And the base console does not have the cleanest 4K image either, so it's sort of like one of those things where it's like, yeah, I think at a normal viewing distance it probably holds up pretty all right here. But pixel peeping it does exhibit some flaws. But there's also, if you're interested in 8K mode and image quality priority mode, much like F1. I know you gave up your 8K set, but perhaps that's of some interest.
Absolutely. Well, tell me more.
Yeah, so basically it's called an image quality priority mode, and they basically said it's 4K 60 on 4K panels and 8K 60 on 8K panels. The 8K mode did look very good. It's using PSSR in both instances to hit those resolutions. And of course here you lose the RT reflections. It did look very clean, but personally I would probably prefer to play at 4K, take the hit to image quality, and just enjoy those ray traced reflections on track, as we so often say. But I think that 8K mode might be compelling for those with an 8K television to at least try out. It does look very smooth, does look very sharp. If you happen to be sitting a couple feet away from that panel, I'm sure you will notice a...
Exactly, and he's trying not to be dismissive of people with 8K panels, but it's exactly what he said, and the same as my analogy earlier about just standing as a 6-foot guy on the beach looking at the sand. You always can't resolve the detail from even 6 feet away. You have to get a couple of feet away to start seeing those individual grains of sand, and that's exactly the same as 8K, as he said. a couple of feet away. That's how close you've got to be able to see the difference between 8K and 4K.
But, the fact that the F1 guys are doing it as well, that was a pleasant surprise. So maybe there will actually be more 8K content for the vanishingly few that actually own an 8K screen.
Yeah.
But do you want to move on? What are we looking at next? I guess everybody really wants to know what Guerrilla Games are going to be doing with PlayStation 5 Pro. And obviously, right from the reveal, we saw Horizon Forbidden West.
They have a new anti-aliasing and reconstruction method that isn't PSSR and isn't checkerboarding either. And it looks very, very impressive in my view. We had the old PS5 code and the PS5 Pro code running side by side.
Look how much sharper that is on the PS5 Pro. Now, I know the resolution mode is a very similar sharpness to the PS5 Pro mode. But like I say, the whole point of the Pro, for me anyway, or for a lot of people, is you're getting the smoothness of the performance mode with the graphics of the resolution mode, because the resolution mode is going to be jerky compared to the performance mode, but the performance mode is going to be mucky, indistinct, and a little bit blurry compared to the resolution mode. And the Pro, you get both of those things at once, which is really cool. Look, you pay attention to this resolution mode and have a look at how jerky it is compared and how blurry the resolution mode is.
The areas where the old 1800p checkerboard was like breaking apart, especially on elements like foliage and little grass bits and blades, and it just kind of was a little bit messy there with the checkerboarding. Or certain like fine details in the image, like he showed me a wall of computer screens that was like super artifacty and ugly on the base PS5, and that was resolved perfectly in the PS5 Pro. With the new method, they were able to get everything looking very nice, full resolution, very, very smooth, very, very detailed. I actually have some matched footage here with the old performance mode and the old fidelity mode. And the new PS5 performance mode is just so stable, relatively speaking. It's really impressive. Looks very natural, I would say, a little bit on the softer side. There is a slight tendency to blur some foliage elements together, but it's very free of aliasing. I would say it's probably the best image quality in show, to be honest. What I saw, like it holds up really nicely on a close range there. They mentioned that the upsampling solution they have here is being developed for future titles, but they were able to backport it back to Forbidden West, so that could indicate what they might be planning to do in the future.
Yeah, so Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now, this one was quite interesting because in the wake of the reveal, obviously, we then got the ProRes version of the Mark Cerny reveal. But Sony also shared with us some additional B-roll, including a 7-minute ProRes clip of Rebirth, which we spun out into a video, which excited a lot of people because, well, it's one of those games where the base PlayStation 5 version of the game in performance mode actually had...
How much better is that on the Pro? Wow. This is night and day difference to me. This is, like they said at the beginning of the video, if you watched it this far, a generational leap. It really is. And that's performance smooth. When you're looking at it now against that PS5 Pro version, which is going to be smooth as well, but with that extra sharpness, that is night and day difference. That really is massive. That actually looks out of focus now on the PS5 performance smooth. Obviously, if you put it in graphics fidelity mode on the PS5, you may get a similar looking game, but you're going to introduce that jerkiness of movement at 30 frames a second. It's absolutely superb.
Well, it's one of those games where the base PlayStation 5 version of the game in performance mode actually had some pretty profound quality issues, which the PlayStation 5 Pro cleans up immensely so. But at the same time, we only had that 7 minutes of footage. We hadn't been hands-on. You know, we hadn't been interactive with the experience, but that changes now. So I'm curious as...
Look at the difference. That literally looks out of focus. Literally looks out of focus.
To whether any of your sort of observation.
Oh my God! Oh, excuse my coughing, people. It's just, I'm a bit blown away by this. This is crazy. The earring is what stood out to me straight away. How much more realistic, metallic, and real it looked. The glassy effect on it, the metallic effect on the metal. Look at her hair. You can see like individual strands of hair where it's just like a mashed together a bit on the PS5 performance smooth. Like I said a minute ago, this is not knocking the PS5 in any way, shape or form, because it still does an amazing job on most games. But if you stick it into graphics mode, you're going to get a presumably similar look to the PS5 Pro mode, but with those lack of smoothness on the movement issues, which so many people love, which is why they play performance mode. But yeah, the difference there, you know, there's a lot of people out there before we had these hands-on experience videos like this saying stuff like, oh no, there's no difference between a PS5 and a PS5 Pro. Well, that chucks that out the window completely, because clearly the difference is absolutely monumental. I'm sorry, but if people can't see that, they're either incredibly biased or just looking at something completely different to everybody else.
Have changed or evolved, having gone hands-on.
Like cliff faces where the resolve could look a little bit weird. But measured up against the original game in the performance mode, I think that the image stability is probably fine enough. Again, and obviously you do get an enormous amount of detail. One issue with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth that has not been improved here is that the LOD popping does create its own image stability issues, which are also significant. So that's another thing to factor in, of course. That's to say that not all of the image instability that you might notice is from PSSR here. It's from possibly that underlying issue with the LODs here. And I spoke to a representative at the booth, and interestingly, obviously I had speculated maybe what they could do at 30 FPS here. But like with The Last of Us, it's basically just a Pro Enhanced mode here, which is targeting 4K 60. That's all they're doing here. I don't think that everyone needs to go all out and do a 30 FPS mode if they don't want to do it, if they don't think it's worthwhile. I think in many games, it's not going to be worthwhile in PS5 Pro to do a 30 FPS mode, because when you're dealing with a very high quality image at 4K 60, like we generally are here, kind of what's the point? Unless you have...
Literally, what's the point? Most of the people buying the PS5 Pro are buying it because they want 60 frames a second with that extra graphical fidelity of the graphics mode of the original PS5. The people that don't mind the slightly jerky movement or the 30 frames a second that's not going to be as smooth as the Pro, the people that don't really care about that, that are still happy with the graphics fidelity mode, all stick to their PS5 base model and be completely happy. Absolutely fantastic. But the people that are buying a Pro are buying it a lot of the time because they want both things at the same time. They want the graphic fidelity mode of the PS5 with the smoothness of performance mode. So by concentrating and doing these 30 FPS modes on the Pro is stupid. It's like, literally, as you said, what's the point? It's like, come on.
Pro to do a 30 FPS mode, because when you're dealing with a very high quality image at 4K 60 like we generally are here, kind of what's the point? Unless you have additional ray tracing to throw on there that's already, you know, on PS5 or on PC or something that you could kind of throw in there and improve, then what's the point? I mean, you could improve some settings in a more minor way, like with the LODs here, but I don't think that's that huge of an improvement personally to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, in that it's doing just one Pro mode with PSSR, 60 FPS, 4K target. It looks way, way more detailed than the old performance mode, which looked a little blocky to me, a little soft, not very good. Again, in these side-by-sides they were able to show me. There were some issues, again, when kind of focusing out into the kind of middle part of the image, looking at stuff over time, you were seeing a bit of that instability, and I am able to show you that with some of the B-roll they provided, some of that instability, some of that breakup, but it's got way more image detail than before, like a really stunning amount of image detail here.
Next game, Demon's Souls, PlayStation 5 launch title, rightly celebrated as a simply superb game.
Absolutely.
I dimly recall that it had a 4K 30 quality mode and a 1440p 60 performance mode.
That's correct.
What have we got for the 5 Pro?
So here, and I just wanted to say right off the bat that, like, looking at Demon's Souls in 2024, it's remarkable how good it looks. Like, the guys at Bluepoint did such a good job with this, and it's still, like, if they released it today, it would still be like just a top tier visual experience. It's extraordinary how good it looks and how awesome it is, even on the base PS5. It's just it runs beautifully. It looks awesome. It's so incredibly detailed. It's just a real highlight on the PlayStation 5. But here, it's very much like Tilu, where there's a pro mode, and then there's the old cinematic mode, basically their equivalent of a fidelity mode or a quality mode. They called it a cinematic mode at 4K 30, and the old performance mode. So you get the new modes, or rather the new mode, and the old modes here, just like with Tilu. Okay. And the cinematic and performance modes are the exact same as they were before. The pro mode is clearly resolving an image that perceptually looks very 4K, I would say. It looks pretty 4K. It's a little soft, but it does hold up well, even at very close range on a 4K set. They didn't confirm any numbers or details to me on the upscaling solution potentially in use or the resolutions. They were a little tight-lipped about that, but it's resolving a good amount of detail. And the image quality was quite good, although Demon's Souls is a bit of a lower contrast game, especially in the bullet area that they were showing me. So it is like a little bit more favorable. But they also did show us some footage of kind of a big boss fight, a couple big boss fights here. And they also look very good, even though they're higher contrast and they have more challenging content like fire. It does look very, very good. But I'd also say that Demon's Souls is perhaps the game that we saw at the showcase that was the least in need of an upgrade on PS5 Pro.
Yeah, it looks great on PS5 anyway.
It looks so good on PS5, and in a normal viewing distance, I think that 1440p 60 performance mode is actually a real highlight. I think it looks really, really good on base PS5, even still today.
The question is, the question everybody wants to be asking is it worth it? Because we have got this $699 console. And I guess the question is, to what extent, like for like against, say, a PlayStation 5 digital, I guess that's the closest comparison point, is it worth the extra money? Now, from my perspective, from what I've seen so far, particularly when you're looking at the areas where the developers have clearly gone the extra mile, I mean, that Formula One stuff really looked fantastic. It was like on your PC buying a new graphics card, being able to access features you couldn't access before, and just generally getting an uplift everywhere else.
Exactly, that's the point. A lot of the people that are kind of saying that the Pro maybe isn't worth it might be a little bit biased. I don't know. But it's almost undeniable looking at that F124. That is the kind of difference. But just take a PC as an example. I've got a gaming PC as well, so I can be completely unbiased. I'll play on both. But to get that jump that was from the PS5 F124 to the Pro on a PC, like Richard just said, that's a graphics card jump, which the graphics card on PCs can cost a heck of a lot of money to get a noticeable difference that big. So in that terms, and if that's what you're after, then I think it's going to be very good value for money, what I like, for what I want from a console anyway. But let's see what they say.
I mean, that Formula One stuff really looked fantastic. It was like on your PC buying a new graphics card, being able to access features you couldn't access before, and just generally getting an uplift everywhere else. Would you concur? What's your thought on all of this?
I'd agree with that, but I think, especially with these console games, it does depend on how you like to play these games, because I think if you like playing games at higher frame rates, it's much more worth it, especially if you like playing games in their 60 FPS performance modes that are more demanding, like where we see 1440p resolutions facilitated by FSR 2 or 3 and image quality isn't quite there, but just that class of sort of really advanced game that might...
It's like I said earlier, I love games at 60 frames a second, and to me, to get the... Richard he's like, what are you saying, dude? Looks a bit confused, like, what is going on here? But anyway, for the people, cut a story short, if you don't mind 30 frames a second, if you're quite happy with that, you can chuck on the graphics mode on the PS5 and get graphics that's going to be similar a lot of the time to the Pro. So it's not going to be worth it to you if you can live with that 30 hertz mode. 30 frames a second, you like it, be happy with the PS5. If you're a bit like me, you're quite intolerant to that and you love the performance mode, you just got to have 60 frames a second when it's offered, even at the cost of better graphics, then the Pro is way more worth it to people like me, because you get both. You get those better graphics and you get the performance mode at the same time. And some games, as we saw, like F1 24 and some of the ray tracing on Gran Turismo, was actually way beyond what base PS5 does, even in graphic mode.
And image quality isn't quite there, but just that class of sort of really advanced game that might also, like you mentioned, have ray tracing in there, might be more intensive and might struggle a lot on base PS5. Getting those games to a 4K output with a reasonably stable image can make a huge difference. It can make a really, really big difference. It's just tough because this generation we've seen developers push out visual features, and in a world without upsampling, we'd probably be looking at like a lot of games at 1080p at 900p pushing out more advanced visual features. Certainly that was the initial target for Unreal Engine 5 in terms of that delivering like a 1080p like image on the consoles. And then of course you have the upsampling in there that's improved that presentation. But I think that's probably the number one area. If you're a gamer who likes to play at 60 FPS, likes to play those more demanding games, that's really where I see the benefit being mostly. In at least existing titles, right? What we have right now. There's also, like you said, the possibility that with games that do have ray tracing on PC or do have toggles for more ray tracing or enhanced higher fidelity versions of existing ray traced effects, you could get an improvement here. Like you would expect those ray tracing features to show up here, whereas you probably wouldn't on base PS5 or Series X or Series S. In games like GT7 and F124 in particular, you're seeing the PS5 Pro legitimately deliver a much stronger visual experience because it can handle a lot more ray tracing in real time, even at 60 FPS possibly, like we see in those games, but only really if the CPU time is there. That's kind of the trade-off there, right? You might be going down to 30 FPS. But I would say that on the flip side, you know, we've discussed like where the PS5 Pro shines. If you are playing games at 30 FPS, I think image quality on the base consoles, especially at a normal viewing distance sitting from a 4K television, it's pretty much just about there. Yeah. It's basically fine. And I think in that case, you're going to see a lot of games where PS5 Pro, even if it does have a 30 FPS mode, it's not really delivering a whole lot more to you unless you do have some of those ray tracing features on top of that. And also, if you're happy with image quality on consoles at 1440p delivered to you in those 60 FPS modes, I think it's also possibly a worthwhile thing to stick with your base PS5 if you aren't experiencing some of those issues. Yeah, exactly. But I do ultimately think that if you value that fidelity and you do fall into one of those two camps, you do want to see more ray tracing, you do like those performance modes, I think the Pro is a really good investment. There is a conversation to be had a little bit here between the value of a Pro and a PC, but I think for a hassle-free gaming experience, delivering high-fidelity visuals with no particular issues with updates, no particular issues with incompatibility, a very stable and smooth operating system, I don't think you're going to get that out of PC for at least another few years here. I think when you look at the PS5 Pro, that's delivering a really good experience, and it's also fairly favorable in terms of that cost relative to a PC. But I also do see it, like you said, as a kind of PC-like upgrade where you're getting more of those features, you're adding on more of those ray tracing, you're adding on more of that ray tracing rather, you're getting kind of that upgrade from that like 3060 Ti to like that 4070 class of GPU or something in that vicinity, 6000 class of GPU, where you are able to push things up a little bit. Now, in some games that's going to be a more compelling upgrade than in some other games, but the addition of PSSR in particular, I think gives you a lot more to play with potentially on the PS5 Pro and gives you a more significant upgrade than you would expect from the raw specs alone potentially. That 45% boost in kind of raster performance, that 67% boost in CU count, I think is underselling it.
So what happened was a lot of people were looking at those figures, like a 45% boost in GPU, whatever it was, and things like that, those numbers, and saying, it's not that much different from a PS5. It's all to do with all the extra gubbins which is going on in the background and the AI stuff, the PSSR and all that sort of stuff as well. It makes a huge difference when you combine all those things together. And that AMD ray tracing chip, it's like finally seeing it in action now, and it's only going to get better.
But yeah, I think ultimately the PS5 Pro is for those users. It eases some of that tension where the PS5 is often not quite there in terms of image quality relative to PC, often not quite there in terms of image quality, even relative to what we saw last generation with like PS4 Pro or Xbox One X, where we did often see higher native resolutions in titles than we're seeing now. But overall, I think the console is worth it for that kind of player. It's unfortunate that it comes in at such an increased cost relative to the PS5, Whereas like PS4 Pro was coming in at the same price as the PS4 when it launched. Bit of a different era in terms of the progress in silicon process technologies. And
it's true what he said. When the PS4 Pro came out, that came out at the same price as the PS4 launched for, because it was like, a few years later. And that's not going to happen anymore, because the PS4 Pro, when that came out, the PS4 when that came out, that was old technology. It was ancient in PC terms. When the PS5 came out, it was already cutting edge, even compared to PCs. And the same has happened again. So yeah, you can't make the same comparison. There's no way a PS5 Pro could have came out at the same price as the PS5 launched for, like $480, whatever it was, and then have a price drop on the PS5. There's no way that could happen this time. It's just not possible.
The complexity in those technologies. So that's changed a little bit, but I don't think that the underlying value proposition is that different. I think for those players who do want that enhanced experience, PS5 Pro is going to provide that experience.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really impressed with what you've seen so far. The thing that's missing to me is Unreal Engine 5 games that were running at really, really low resolutions, which were kind of abused. Well, FSR2 was abused to get us back to decent resolutions outputs and wasn't quite achieving the target. So I'm eagerly awaiting to see PS5 Pro updates for the likes of Star Wars Outlaws and Avatar and all of those games, and Immortals of Avium, those type of experiences where the image quality at 60 wasn't holding up and where the experience often wasn't hitting 60. I think that's really where we're going to see some really interesting stuff based on what we've seen so far. And I also think we're going to continue to see variable levels of commitment to the Pro. If you think back to PS4 Pro, we lost count of the amount of times that a game would ship at 1080 on the base console and 1440 on the Pro. At least this time, even if it is kind of like a low effort Pro implementation, the tools are there to actually get better results with PSSR versus just, an increase in raw rendering resolution, which you probably couldn't do that much with anyway, bearing in mind that relatively the GPU size increase is lower compared to PS4 Pro. So, I still say that there's a lot to come here. And I think there's a lot generally about the system we still don't know about. We still don't know what Ultra Boost mode does, for example, or Game Boost as it's officially been christened. How does it work? What does it actually do? We still don't know. Nobody at the event was seemingly committed to telling us. But what can I say? I think this has been a really interesting exercise, and I'm really happy that your first press trip for Digital Foundry was actually something quite meaningful and, dare I say it, profound. It was a great experience by the sound of it.
Right, so I think that'll do, because so we've seen it. Digital Foundry, very respected channel, know what they're talking about, actual hands-on experience, and that's very, very, very positive indeed. So, like I say, I've got a gaming PC, so I can be unbiased. I like the hassle-free experience of consoles, so that's one of the reasons I ordered a Pro, because I want to experience that 60 frames a second gameplay with the enhanced graphics without the compromise of getting better graphics at the cost of frame rate. So, and all the other stuff we don't know about yet. Like they said, there's the game boost thing and all sorts of stuff. And PSSR is only going to get better. So it is. I'm going to wrap this video up now. So if you enjoyed it, be sure to bash that like and subscribe button. It really does help. But most of all, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you again in the next one. Bye for now.